Well, good morning, Icon Church. It is great to be with you this morning. We've been going through some parables of Jesus, and I like to call them subversive stories. But before I kind of jump into everything, I kind of wanted to start and give just a moment for us to have some time for reflection. I know that might sound a little weird, but I want to start with an old ancient parable. And I heard this on the Robcast. I think it was actually maybe his second episode ever. And I think the episode was called "The River, the Mountain, and You." And in it, he tells kind of this ancient parable, and it simply goes like this: At first, the river is a river, and the mountain is a mountain. Then, the river is no longer a river, and the mountain is no longer a mountain. But eventually, the river becomes a river, and the mountain becomes a mountain again. And I think, as I was kind of processing really, the story that we're going to be sharing today, I kept coming back to that ancient parable, that ancient story. For many of us, the last year and a half, the last 2 years, has been filled with nothing but loss. Whether it's loss of a dream or loss of loved ones, loss of a job, the loss of friendships. For many of us, it was the loss of everything that we had built up to this point. And I love the last couple of weeks. We took some time and we would just kind of put some things into the comment section. And I thought about doing that this morning. And then I've been having a few technical difficulties on my end, and I'm not sure that I'll be able to see the comments. But here's what I want you to think about. What have you lost recently? Name it. And if you feel like it, you can put it in the comments. I don't know that I'll be able to see it, but you don't have to. But I want you to think about right now, wherever you are, whether you're watching this or listening to this, and maybe it's right now on Sunday, August 15th, or maybe it's another day during the week. I want you to think about what you've lost and name it. The river is no longer a river. The mountain is no longer a mountain. Things have changed, and they're going to be different forever. Loss is a significant part of our lives. And many times, naming the loss is just simply the first step in being able to watch the mountain become a mountain and the river become a river again. It's never going to be exactly the same as it was. It can't be. There's no possible way for it to be. But what we're going to see in the stories that we're going to look at today is people dealing with loss, losing something and finding it or refinding it. And there's a lot within that process that we're going to see that I think is going to speak to us. So I want to start in Luke chapter 15, and I'm going to be reading a lot. And I think part of the technical difficulties was I was trying to add another app in that might be able to kind of like overlay some thoughts on my video, but it was not working, and it was just causing nothing but problems. But here's what it says. This is Luke chapter 15. And I'm going to be reading out of the English Standard Version. I usually like the NIV, but I like the way that this says a couple of things. And I'm going to be starting in verse 11. It's a parable that's known as the parable of the lost son. Some translations might say the parable of the prodigal son. And man, for so long, I heard Amy Jill Levine call this the parable of the absent mother, which I thought was just great. It's so awesome. But anyway, parable of the lost son. And it starts like this. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to the father, "Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me." And I've heard lots of different commentaries on this. I've probably told this particular parable half a dozen times in the last 2 years alone, just in speaking at different churches and places all around. And so, I think this is probably one of the most well-known parables, probably one of the most overspoken parables. And every time I read it, I find something new and fascinating. But what's interesting about this little piece, give me the share of property that's coming to me, you almost get this idea of a son um, that is looking at his inheritance and basically going, hey, dad, I wish you were dead. I just want what you're going to give me one day when you're no longer around. And so you kind of have this picture of this subversive story that Jesus is telling about a son that would never do this, and a father who, some people would say would never comply. Other people would argue this is exactly what a father in the circumstance would do. But either way, it's a subversive story. Father, give me the share of the property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Interesting word right there, right? Like the younger son asked for it, but the father, who has two sons, divided his property between them. And what's fascinating is that word where it's talking about dividing his property, that word property actually means life. So you get this picture of a father giving away his life, dividing his life between his two sons. Now, in that culture, it would have been common for the older son or the older sibling to receive a double portion. So if it was two sons, the property, the estate would be divided into three equal portions. 2/3 would go to the elder and 1/3 would go to the younger. Now, it's possible that the father gave the 1/3 to the younger son and gave 2/3 to the older, and it's possible that he just split it 50-50. We don't really know, but we're just kind of speculating at some of the context of the story. So the father, he divided his property, his life between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And what's fascinating is, the father, it was life, right? So the father gave his life, his property, gave his life. For the younger son, it was he squandered his being, his substance. And where we get that word prodigal is in that definition of reckless. Prodigal simply means recklessly extravagant. This is just an over-the-top, ridiculous spending. And he would have liquidated all of the assets that he was given, probably at a much lower cost than what he had originally received, because when you're trying to get rid of property quickly, you just kind of take whatever price is there. So you have a son that just took all of this property, squandered it in reckless living, prodigal living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country. Sometimes life just doesn't go the way that we expected it to. Sometimes you have a son that you give your life away to, and then they throw it all away in reckless living. Maybe, you were given something and you made some mistakes, and all of a sudden you find yourself in the middle of a famine. There's lots of things that we do that we can make mistakes on, but there's very little that can be done for a famine. Nobody caused that. It's not our fault that we're in the middle of a famine, right? The river was a river and the mountain was a mountain, and now the river is no longer a river. The mountain is no longer a mountain. It's not our fault that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and yet here we are. It's not our fault that we have all of this crazy stuff that's happening, that entire industries are collapsing, that people are losing jobs and homes and careers and dreams and loved ones. And it's nobody's fault that all of this is happening. And so we sit here and we can sit back and we can ignore the loss. We can name it, start to mourn that loss, recognize that there's a new reality that we're living in. We're going to have to figure out what this looks like. You find the youngest brother away from home in a foreign country, and now there's a famine. He squandered everything in reckless living, and he'd spent everything. A severe famine arose in the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. A young Jewish man in a foreign country feeding pigs. He's longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. Have you ever been at a place where you were so low that you wanted to eat pig slop, and people wouldn't even give you that? Right? This is this young man, and it continues on. When he came to himself, it's a sign of repentance, maybe. I think part of what we're going to see in this story is like father, like son. He came to himself. He recognized what was going. I do think there's this aspect of repentance, of coming clean, or of changing our lives, of turning, of going one way, returning to who we were always meant to be, what we were always supposed to do. There's this aspect of that where we become more us. I think that following the way of Jesus makes you more you and me more me. There's something about coming to ourselves. We don't become someone else. We become more of who we were always meant to be. And so I love that just kind of idea. He came to himself and he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, and I perish here with hunger? I'll arise, I'll go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. It's this perfectly well-crafted speech. And I have this picture of a son that's walking back home in shame, and he's just rehearsing this speech over and over and over. Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. He arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, felt compassion, ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And he doesn't get to finish the rest of his speech. He practiced it all for nothing. The father interrupts him. The father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe. Put it on him, put a ring on his hand, shoes on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now, this story is so fascinating to me. And a lot of times growing up, I heard that section of Luke, Luke 11 through 24, heard it over and over and over and over. And there's something about my heartbeat of being drawn toward the prodigal, right? Those that, in the old terms that we used to use in early church planting days, of those that are lost and being drawn to those that are far from God. And you get this picture of this story. It's easy to tell in church and religious circles about the prodigal is so, recklessly extravagant. Look at, they went wayward, and it's not what I'm going to focus on today. Does it mean that part of that story is any less true, or anything we've heard before is wrong? No. I just think there's more aspects to every story, right? You can hear different perspectives and hear different trains of thought. There's a movie a few years ago called Vantage Point, where it was one event and they showed the one event from all of these different vantage points. I think that's part of what we see in Scripture. There are all of these different vantage points. And you can tell the story from the perspective of Jesus. You can tell the story from the perspective of a sinner, of a tax collector, of of a Pharisee, of a scribe. You can tell the story from the perspective of the audience. You can tell the story from the perspective of the father, from the younger son, from the older brother that we're going to hear about in a little bit. I mean, remember, the father had two sons. You know, life is supposed to go a certain way. The river was a river. And in this story, we've been taught to see this story, to have it go a specific way. It's supposed to go this way. This is the way that it's supposed to go. And what's interesting is in Luke chapter 15, there's not just one story where something is lost. There's three stories. And the first story that we find is called the parable of the lost sheep. The second story that we find is the parable of the lost coin. And the third story that we find is the parable of the lost son. And in each story, we find that something is lost. Whatever is lost is found. And then there's a celebration. There's a party, right? So all three elements are woven within Luke chapter 15 in each of these three stories. And here's what we see in the story of, or the parable of the lost sheep. What man of you, having 100 sheep, has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in open country, go after the one that's lost until he finds it? When he's found it, lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. When he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, I have found my sheep that was lost." Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. So we find this story of a really frugal livestock owner. If you were, think about this story, like, it would be highly unlikely that anybody would own 100 sheep themselves. They would be incredibly rich to do so. And so you already have this story that we think maybe people would be able to relate to it. And Jesus is, again, being subversive. 99 sheep? Who owns that much livestock? And what kind of owner knows that they're missing one out of 99? Have you ever tried to count livestock? They're moving all over the place. How selfish do you have to be to know that you missed one sheep out of all of them? And how ridiculously prodigal, extravagant, recklessly extravagant do you have to be to leave 99 and just go look for one? You're leaving the 99? What happens if you lose the 99 now? That's irresponsible. And then you go into the next story, the woman, what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and diligently seek until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I lost." Just so, I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Such a fascinating story. And then we get into the story of the man with two sons. And it's easy to get hyper-focused on one aspect of this story because we see this pattern emerging. Something was lost. That lost thing is found, and it's found because someone goes and searches for it. And then there's a celebration. So you see the lost sheep, something's lost. They search for it. That lost thing is found. There's a celebration. There's a party. The lost coin, you know, that the coin is lost. The woman searches for it. She finds it, throws a party. And then you get to the lost son. And I think it's important for us to understand some of the context, because as Luke chapter 15 starts out, Luke lays this groundwork of what's happening here. And he says this in verse 1. "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him." So you get this picture. Tax collectors and sinners are drawing near to Jesus. I find it fascinating. The longer I'm in ministry, the more I recognize that many times the people that the church always told me were lost are really found, and they just didn't know it. They're usually the ones that are drawn to Jesus. It's the religious that are repelled by Jesus. If you're friends with me, just go read my Facebook wall. Who gets mad? Sinners? No. Christians are the ones that are always arguing with me and mad at me over stuff. It's always Christians. Always. The religious always have problems with everything. It's fascinating. We kind of have this thread through here. The sinners and the tax collectors, they're found, and they didn't know it. And yet we have these other people in here in verse 2. The Pharisees and the scribes grumbled. Of course they did. Saying, this is their indictment of Jesus. This man receives sinners and eats with them. How dare he? Come on, Jesus. You receive sinners and eat with them? Wait, you mean Jesus eats with everybody? Yeah. You mean the worst person in the world? Yep. Jesus eats with them. Jesus even eats with Pharisees and scribes. He eats with everybody. I think Jesus would eat with Republicans and Democrats. Jesus would probably even eat with communists. Right? I think Jesus would eat with anybody. I don't think there's anybody that would be out. I just think Jesus is kind of that way. Something's lost. That lost thing is searched for. It's found. And then there's a celebration. We get to the last story. And it's as Jesus lays it out, we see the people around. They're tax collectors and sinners, and Pharisees and scribes are there, and they're grumbling. And so he tells them this parable. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he lost one of them? So you already get this picture. Jesus is equating the Pharisees to the shepherd. What man of you, if you had 100 sheep, wouldn't leave the 99 and go find the one? And there's so many other things directions we could go, and so many cool things we could tell about this story. But I want to draw attention that in the first parable, the Pharisees are the shepherd. Jesus continues, or what woman having 10 silver coins? Now the Pharisees and the scribes, they are all men, but you kind of see this equivalency between the first story and the second story. Pharisees are the shepherd. The Pharisees are the woman looking for the coin. So you assume, as a listener, that the Pharisees would be the father, right? Because the shepherd went and looked for the sheep. The woman went and looked for the coin. Well, the father is going to go and look for the son. But yet in the first part of that story, we don't see anyone going to look for the younger brother. Tim Keller wrote an entire book called The Prodigal God about this entire concept, about who should have gone and looked for the younger son. It's a great book. There's lots of really good insights, and he makes the equivalency that God is recklessly extravagant with grace, and that's a powerful picture. And that's not really the direction I'm going today. It doesn't make it any less true, but I want to sidestep for a moment here. Jesus is doing something in this story, and he's breaking the convention that he's setting. The shepherd looks for what's lost. The woman looks for what's lost. The father has two sons. Supposedly we think the younger one is the one that's lost. But what if the younger son was found and he just didn't realize it? Nobody goes and looks for him. He just comes back. And we find a father that's kind of like father, like son. The father's recklessly extravagant with the party. He just goes and puts everything's back normal. We're good to go. Like recklessly extravagant. I mean, like father, like son. Maybe the younger son wasn't really all that lost. Then we get to the second part of the story. Jesus doesn't end it at the same point that every other story ends. The lost thing is found, and there's a party. The older son was in the field. As he came and drew near the house, he heard the music and the dancing. I think my favorite line in this whole story is that line right there. I mean, it's a great party if you can hear the dancing. Think about that for a second. That's amazing. So, anyway, I need to speed this up. Going way too long. Your brother has come. Your father killed the fattened calf because he received him back safe and sound. He's angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered the father, look, these many years I have served you. I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me one goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you've killed the fattened calf for him? And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It is fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this brother was dead. He is alive, and is alive. He was lost and is found. See, the Pharisees should have been the father. They should have gone and looked for the younger son. But we find the father searching instead for the lost son, the older son, the elder brother. He's the one that's really lost. So Jesus turns the entire thing on his head. The whole time, the Pharisees are the shepherd looking. They're the woman looking for the coin. They're supposed to be the father looking for the coin, but we find out that oftentimes the religious people are the ones that are outside of the party. There's a party going on. You can hear the dancing, and yet they find themselves outside of it. So today, here's kind of how I want to end. It's okay to mourn. The river's no longer a river. The mountain is no longer a mountain. But eventually the river will become a river and the mountain will become a mountain again. 2, do you hear the dancing? There's a party going on. We're all invited to it. See, the story ends and we don't know what the older brother does. Does he go into the party, or does he stay on the outside? We don't know. The story just ends. See, sheep are easy. Coins, they're easy. Children, that's a totally different story. Children have a mind and a will of their own. You can't just compel them to do something that they don't want to do. So when you find a lost son, a lost daughter, the best you can do is invite them into the party. Everything I have is yours. It always was yours. See, we find out that the one that was really lost thought they were found the whole time. Warren Zevon in 2002 was on the David Letterman show. And he had just found out that he had cancer. And Dave asked him this really profound question. He just said, you know what, do you know something about life that maybe I don't know? Warren had just found out he has terminal cancer, and his response was one of the most amazing responses I've ever heard in an interview. He just said, I know you're supposed to enjoy every sandwich. The river's not a river. The mountain is not a mountain. So we do the best that we can. We mourn the loss. We embrace where we are. We enjoy every sandwich. We hear the dancing, and we join the party. So wherever you are and whatever's going on with you, this week, I want you to think about what you've lost. Name it. The river's no longer a river. The mountain's no longer a mountain. Then, enjoy every sandwich. Start living right here and right now, because there's a party going on. We just need to enter in. Thanks for letting me share. I'm going to hand it back over to Pastor Kelly in a little hard transition here. I took a little bit too much time, but it's my honor to be able to share with you this morning.
Thank you, Craig, for sharing that with us. You didn't take too much time. It's all good. Lots of good things to think about. I think one of my favorite things about what Craig was just sharing was this juxtaposition between loss and joy, that I think is a hard one to find sometimes, because sometimes the loss can be so overwhelming that it's hard to enter into the party, because it's like it's hard to make space for the both and instead of either or. And I feel that right now. I feel that that's so hard to sometimes to see past our grief and loss, but I think sometimes we think that we have to be like over it before we can enter into the joy, but really it can be both. We can be grieving what we have lost and also entering into the joy that we have right in front of us in the midst of that loss. And so, yeah, that's what I'm going to take with me this week, is just really trying to hold both in my hands at the same time. And, to name the loss, to experience it, to feel it, but then to also enjoy the sandwich. This week we're talking about sandwiches. Last week we talked about pizza. So everyone's going to be equally hungry this week as they were last week. But yeah, just thank you, Craig, so much for that. That was a great, that's one of my favorite things about the parables is the fact that, like, I loved watching people in the comments give kind of their perspective of what they're drawn to in it and how there's so many different ways to see things. That's kind of the point, is to, like we been talking about how Amy Jo Levine in her book says the parables, it's not about what they mean, but it's about what they do. What can they do within us? And so this week we can spend time meditating on Luke 15 on these parables. Oh, it's a cat. Apparently she wanted to be on our live video this morning. This is and here's the thing. Okay. Don't let her fool you. She's actually really mean. She's probably really mad at me right now. She's not a cuddly cat, but anyway. Welcome to the Matlock Zoo. We used to have dogs behind us, and then now we had a cat enter, so, But anyway, thank you all so much for being here today. Just a reminder that on August 29th, it's the last Sunday of August, we currently have scheduled for an outdoor in-person where we're going to do baptisms at the river here in San Marcos. And just so you know, we are carefully watching COVID is a mess again. It's just, it's never really stopped, but it's just really ramping up. And so we are paying attention, and we will keep you updated if there are any changes. But as of right now, if you are interested in being baptized on our next in-person service, you can go ahead and send us an email or go to our website, and there's a place where you can go on there and sign up, just so we kind of know what to prepare for. So I hope you all have a fantastic week, and we will see you back here next Sunday.